Have you ever felt invisible? Like you were standing in the middle of a room full of people and nobody could see you. Nobody could hear you. And no matter how hard you tried, the world just kept moving without you. As if you were made of glass. As if your presence did not matter. As if your dreams were too small or too strange or too big for the space you were allowed to occupy. And you started to wonder, quietly, in those dark and honest moments, whether you were simply not enough, not talented enough, not strong enough, not special enough to be seen by the world that you so desperately wanted to reach. Welcome to English to Inspire, the channel where great lives become your greatest lessons, where every word you hear is training your English and your mind at the same time. Because language is not just grammar and vocabulary. It is the way you think, the way you see yourself, and the way you speak to the world. And today, the story we are going to live together is the story of a woman who was told, in many ways and many times, that she was not enough, and who decided, quietly and then loudly and then impossibly, that she would become everything. If this kind of story speaks to you, if you believe that learning English and building a better life can happen at the same time, then subscribe to this channel right now. Because every week we bring you a new story, a new lesson, and a new reason to keep going. And today, that reason has a name. And that name is Beyoncé Giselle Knowles, born in Houston, Texas. A shy and quiet girl who carried something enormous inside her chest long before the world was ready to receive it. She was not born famous. She was not born confident. She was not born with a clear path in front of her. And if you think that the woman who would one day command stadiums of 100,000 people was always certain, always powerful, always untouchable, then you have misunderstood the story entirely. Because the real story begins in the silence, in the rejection. In the small girl who wanted so badly to be seen that she turned that wanting into a kind of fuel, a kind of fire that could not be extinguished, no matter how many times the world tried to blow it out. And here is what I need you to understand before we go any further. Before we take a single step into her life. I need you to understand that her story is not about talent alone, because talent is common. The world is full of talented people who never became anything, and her story is not about luck. Because luck alone builds nothing that lasts. Her story is about something far more difficult and far more available to you right now. Today, in your life, in your situation, and that thing is the decision to keep going when everything around you is telling you to stop. And that is exactly where her story begins. Picture a city in the southern United States, hot and humid and full of life. A place called Houston, Texas, where in the year 1981, a little girl was born into a middle-class family that believed deeply in two things: family and faith. And that little girl was quiet in the way that deep rivers are quiet, still on the surface, but moving with tremendous force underneath. And her name was Beyoncé. A name taken from her mother's maiden name. A name that nobody could quite pronounce at first. A name that was different and unusual, and that somehow, looking back now, was always destined to stand alone at the top of a marquee. Her mother, Tina Knowles, was a woman of extraordinary creativity, a talented seamstress and businesswoman who would later build her own fashion empire. And her father, Matthew Knowles, was a medical equipment salesman who was ambitious and driven, and who saw in his daughter something that most fathers see, but few fathers are, willing to bet everything on. And Matthew was not most fathers, because when he looked at his little girl singing in the church choir, singing in school talent shows, singing anywhere and everywhere she was allowed to sing, he did not just see a cute child performing. He saw something rare, something that demanded to be taken seriously. Something that the world needed to hear. Beyoncé was shy, and this is something that most people find difficult to believe when they see her today. Commanding a stage with the precision of a general and the fire of a preacher. But the truth is that the stage was her escape, not her natural habitat. It was the one place where the quiet girl could become someone larger than her shyness, allowed her to be an ordinary life. And that is something you need to sit with for a moment. Because how many of you are waiting to feel confident before you step forward? How many of you are waiting to feel ready, to feel brave, to feel certain, before you allow yourself to be seen? And here was a girl who was never quite comfortable and who stepped forward anyway, every single time. When Beyoncé was around 7 years old, she auditioned for a local performing arts school, and she was accepted, and it was there that something began to crystallize inside her. Not just a love for performing, but a hunger for excellence, a refusal to do anything halfway, a standard that she set for herself that was higher than anything her teachers required of her. And her father saw this hunger, and he made a decision that would reshape the entire trajectory of the family. He decided that his daughter's gift was too important to leave to chance, too powerful to be treated as a hobby. And so he began to manage her career, to study the music industry, to sacrifice his own professional comfort for the possibility that his daughter might one day change the world. This is where the story gets uncomfortable, and I want you to pay attention here. Because Matthew Knowles was not a music manager. He was a salesman who loved his daughter so much that he was willing to learn an entirely new world from zero, willing to look foolish and inexperienced and out of place, willing to do whatever it took to give her the platform that he believed she deserved. And the question I want to leave you with right now is this. Who in your life believes in you with that kind of unreasonable, inconvenient, all-consuming certainty? And more importantly, do you believe in yourself even half as much as Matthew believed in his daughter on those early Houston mornings when everything was still just a dream? In the early 1990s, Matthew Knowles made a decision that would either prove his vision or expose it as foolishness, and he began assembling a group of young girls around his daughter, a girl group that would train together and perform together and compete together. And the group was called Girls' Time, a name that felt full of promise and urgency and youth. And inside that group was a young Beyoncé, who was already different from the others. Not because she was louder or more aggressive, but because she worked harder. She stayed later. She repeated things more times than anyone asked her to. She treated every rehearsal like it was the most important moment of her life. Because somewhere deep inside her, she understood that preparation is not something you do when you feel like it. Preparation is something you do every single day, whether you feel like it or not. Matthew pulled his daughter out of school so that she could train full-time, and this decision cost the family enormously. Not just financially, but socially and emotionally. Because people around them began to talk, began to question, began to suggest that this man had lost his mind, that he was pushing his child too hard, that he was chasing something unrealistic and irresponsible. And the pressure of other people's doubt is something that can crush a dream before it ever has the chance to breathe. And yet Matthew kept going, and Beyoncé kept working, and the group kept rehearsing, because they had decided to believe in something that the world had not yet confirmed. And that kind of faith is one of the most difficult and most necessary things a human being can practice. Then came 1993, and with it came an opportunity that felt like destiny. Because Girls' Time was selected to appear on Star Search, which was at that time the most important talent competition on American television. The kind of stage that could change everything overnight. The kind of moment that young performers dream about when they close their eyes and imagine what their future might look like. And the girls traveled to that stage full of hope and energy and the belief that this was their moment. That all the sacrifice and all the training and all the early mornings had been leading exactly here, to this television stage, in front of millions of people who were about to discover them. They lost. And I need you to feel the weight of that word for a moment, because this was not a quiet, private failure that could be processed in the comfort of a bedroom with the door closed. This was a public defeat broadcast on national television to millions of viewers. And Beyoncé was 11 years old, and she stood on that stage, and she felt the full force of rejection in front of the entire country. And the group that had beaten them was a rock band, and the judges smiled and moved on. And just like that, the dream that had consumed years of sacrifice and thousands of hours of rehearsal was told, in front of everyone, that it was not good enough. But here is what separates the people who eventually rise from the people who stay fallen. And this is the part of the story I need you to carry with you. Long after this narration ends, B-E-E-E-U-S-E. Beyoncé did not quit after Star Search. She did not decide that the defeat was a verdict. She did not allow a panel of judges on a television show to define the ceiling of her life. And in later years, she would say that losing on Star Search was one of the most important things that ever happened to her. Because it taught her at 11 years old that failure is not the end of the story. Failure is just the part of the story that tests whether you were serious in the first place. And now I am asking you directly, what failure in your life have you been treating as a verdict when it was only ever a test? After the defeat on Star Search, something shifted inside the Knowles household. Not a shift toward doubt or retreat, but a shift towards something harder and more determined. Like a fire that has been kicked, and instead of dying has spread to the walls and the ceiling and the floor. And Matthew Knowles responded to the loss the way only a man of absolute conviction can respond. He restructured everything. He studied harder. He trained the girls more intensely. He contacted more people in the industry. He refused to let one public defeat become the final word on his daughter's future. And Beyoncé watched all of this, absorbed all of this, and learned a lesson that no classroom could have taught her, which is that the response to failure is always more important than the failure itself. Always, without exception, in every area of life. The group went through changes. Members came and went. The name evolved, and eventually a new formation emerged that would go on to become one of the most successful girl groups in the history of recorded music. And that group was called Destiny's Child, a name taken from the book of Isaiah in the Bible, a name that carried weight and purpose, and a sense that something larger than individual ambition was at work. And by the late 1990s, Destiny's Child had signed with Columbia Records and released music that was climbing the charts and reaching ears around the world. And the girl from Houston who had lost on Star Search was now standing at the edge of something enormous, something real, something that the years of sacrifice had been quietly building toward all along. But fame, when it finally arrives, does not arrive clean. It arrives complicated and loud and full of things you did not anticipate. And Destiny's Child experienced this truth in one of the most painful ways possible, because there were lineup changes that became public, members who left or were removed. And the story of those changes played out in the media in a way that was messy and uncomfortable. And that put Beyoncé and her father at the center of a narrative that was not entirely flattering. And she was young. She was in her late teens, and she had to learn how to carry public scrutiny while simultaneously trying to perfect her craft, while simultaneously trying to understand who she was as an artist, which is an almost impossible combination of pressures for anyone at any age. The hits came, and they came powerfully. Songs like No, No, No and Say My Name and Survivor became anthems that defined a generation, and Survivor in particular felt like a declaration. Like the group was speaking directly about everything they had endured to get to that moment. The rejection, the doubt, the lineup drama, the years of grueling preparation. And listeners around the world connected with that message because survival is a universal language. Because every single person who has ever tried to build something knows what it feels like to be told they will not make it. And yet here was Destiny's Child standing on top of the world and singing about exactly that feeling with joy and defiance and absolute certainty. And yet even in the middle of all that success, even with the awards and the sold-out shows and the magazine covers and the screaming fans, Beyoncé was carrying a question inside her that was growing louder with every passing month. A question that successful people rarely admit to carrying because it sounds ungrateful and dangerous and disloyal. And that question was this: who am I when I am standing alone? Who am I without the group, without the safety of other voices around me, without the structure that has defined my entire career since I was a child? And the fact that she was brave enough to eventually answer that question honestly is the reason that the next chapter of her story is the one that will challenge you the most deeply. There are moments in a person's life that do not announce themselves with drama or fanfare. Moments that arrive quietly and then split everything in two, before and after. And one of those moments came for Beyoncé, when she and her father sat down and had a conversation that no amount of fame or success or shared history could make easy. Because the conversation was about ending the professional relationship between a daughter and the man who had sacrificed everything to build her career from nothing. The man who had pulled her out of school and studied an industry he knew nothing about, and faced the doubt of an entire community because he believed in her when she was just a shy little girl singing in a church choir in Houston, Texas. And now that little girl was a grown woman who had decided that she needed to walk the next part of the road alone. Matthew Knowles had been Beyoncé's manager for her entire career. And this was not simply a business arrangement. It was the architecture of her entire professional life. It was the relationship that had made everything possible. And to dismantle it required a kind of courage that most people never have to find. Because it is relatively easy to walk away from things that have failed you. It is relatively easy to leave behind people who have hurt you or disappointed you or let you down. But it is an entirely different and far more difficult thing to walk away from something that has worked. To step back from a relationship that has given you everything. Because the world will not understand it, and the people around you will question it, and part of you will question it too in the quiet moments before sleep. The decision was not made out of anger or ingratitude, and this is something that must be understood clearly, because the easy narrative is to say that success corrupted the relationship, or that ambition destroyed the family bond. But the truth is more honest and more human than that. The truth is that Beyoncé had grown into an artist with a specific and powerful vision for her own life, a vision that required a different kind of professional guidance than the one her father could provide. And recognizing that is not a betrayal. It is a form of self-knowledge that most people never develop because it is too uncomfortable, because it requires you to look clearly at a situation that your emotions want to keep blurry. And clarity in emotional situations is one of the rarest and most necessary forms of courage. She hired new management, she restructured her professional world, and she moved forward. And the relationship with her father changed. As relationships always change when the structures that define them are altered. And there was pain in that. Real pain. The kind of pain that does not disappear with success, or time, or public validation. The kind of pain that you carry in your chest during the moments between the performances and the interviews and the applause. And I want you to sit with that image for a moment. Because behind every extraordinary life, there is a collection of private losses that the world never sees. Sacrifices that were made, not on a stage but in quiet rooms where the only witnesses were the people involved. And now, I'm going to ask you something directly. Because this part of Beyoncé's story is not really about Beyoncé at all. It is about you. It is about the relationships in your life that you have stayed in long past the point where they were serving your growth. The jobs you've kept because leaving felt disloyal. The habits you have maintained because changing them felt like a betrayal of who you used to be. The comfort zones you have refused to exit because the people inside them would not understand why you needed more. And the question is not whether change will be painful, because it will always be painful. The question is whether you are willing to pay the price of growth, or whether you have decided, quietly and without admitting it to yourself, that the pain of staying is easier to manage than the pain of becoming. There is a specific kind of fear that belongs only to the person who has always been part of something larger than themselves. A fear that does not have a simple name, but that lives in the stomach like a cold stone, heavy and constant and impossible to ignore. And Beyoncé knew this fear intimately when she made the decision to step away from Destiny's Child and pursue a solo career. Because everything she had ever known professionally had been built inside a group, inside a shared identity, inside the safety of other voices that surrounded hers and caught her when she wavered. And now she was choosing to walk onto a stage alone, to stand in the center of a spotlight with no one beside her, to ask the world to love her not as part of something but as herself, entirely and only herself. and the world had not yet answered. The year was 2003, and she released her first solo album, Dangerously in Love, and before a single person had heard it, before a single review had been written, or a single radio station had played it, there was a period of silence that only she could hear. A period of waiting that exists between the moment you release something into the world and the moment the world decides what it thinks of you. And that silence is one of the most terrifying experiences a creative person can have. Because in that silence, every doubt you have ever carried about yourself becomes louder. Every voice that ever told you that you were not enough finds new energy. And the only thing standing between you and complete collapse is your belief in the work you have done and the person you have become. The world responded, and it responded with a force that confirmed everything Matthew had seen in that shy little girl decades earlier. Because Dangerously in Love was not just a commercial success. It was a statement. It was proof. It was the sound of a woman who had done the internal work necessary to stand alone, and who was now showing the world exactly what that work had produced. And the album won 5 Grammy Awards in a single night, which at that time was the most Grammy Awards won by any artist in a single evening. And Beyoncé stood on that stage and accepted those awards, not with the arrogance of someone who had always been certain, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had been terrified and had done it anyway. And there is a profound difference between those two things. But I do not want you to get lost in the awards and the numbers and the critical praise, because those things are the result. And what I want you to focus on is the decision, the moment before the result existed. The moment when she had left the group and hired new management, and was standing at the beginning of an entirely unwritten chapter with nothing but her talent and her discipline and her willingness to be wrong in public. And that willingness, that specific and terrifying willingness to be wrong in public, to fail where everyone can see you, to reach for something with no guarantee that your hands will find it, is the thing that separates the people who live extraordinary lives from the people who spend their lives watching those extraordinary lives from a distance and wondering what it would feel like to be brave. So, I am going to stop here for a moment and ask you something that I want you to answer honestly. Not to me, but to yourself. In the private space behind your eyes where the real conversations happen. And the question is this: what is the solo album you have been afraid to release? What is the thing you have been waiting to do until the conditions are perfect and the fear is manageable and the outcome is guaranteed? Because I need you to understand something that Beyoncé understood when she walked into the studio alone for the first time without her group around her, which is that the conditions will never be perfect. The fear will never fully disappear. And the outcome will never be guaranteed. And the only real question is whether you are going to move forward in spite of all of that, or whether you are going to let the cold stone in your stomach make that decision for you. There is a kind of art that is safe, polished, and carefully constructed to offend no one and please everyone. Art that slides smoothly into the world, without friction or resistance. Art that is technically excellent and emotionally empty. And then there is another kind of art entirely. The kind that tears itself open in public. The kind that reaches into the most private and painful corners of a person's life and pulls out the truth and holds it up to the light without apology or explanation. And in 2016, Beyoncé chose the second kind. She chose the harder and more dangerous and more honest path. And she released an album called Lemonade that would not just change the conversation about her as an artist, but would force the entire world to sit down and reckon with something uncomfortable and true and deeply human. Lemonade was not a collection of songs. It was a confession. It was a document. It was a visual and musical journey through betrayal and rage and grief and forgiveness and the complicated, exhausting, beautiful process of choosing to rebuild something that has been broken. And it was built from the most personal material a person can access: her own marriage, her own pain, her own private experience of feeling deceived by someone she had trusted completely. And to take that material and transform it into something that millions of people around the world would listen to in their cars, in their bedrooms, in their quiet moments of private pain, and feel understood. That is not just artistic achievement. That is an act of extraordinary courage, that most people will never fully appreciate because they have never had the honesty to face their own pain that directly. The world reacted with shock and fascination and admiration and debate. And the debate itself was part of the point, because Lemonade was not asking for everyone's approval. It was not constructed to make people comfortable. It was constructed to make people feel, to crack open the polished surface of a perfect public image and show what lives underneath. And what lived underneath was a woman who had been hurt, and who had chosen not to pretend that the hurt did not exist, who had chosen instead to look at it directly and name it and transform it into something that would outlast the pain itself. And that transformation, that specific alchemy of turning suffering into meaning, is one of the most powerful things a human being can do with their time on this earth. And now I need to turn this directly toward you. Because Lemonade is not just Beyoncé's story, it is a mirror. And what I want you to see in that mirror is your own unprocessed pain. The hurt you have been carrying quietly for months or years or perhaps for most of your life. The betrayal you pretended did not affect you. The loss you buried under productivity and distraction and the performance of being fine. Because here is what I know about pain that is never faced. It does not disappear. It does not shrink with time. It goes underground, and it grows roots, and it begins to shape your decisions and your relationships and your self-image in ways you cannot fully see, because you have never been willing to look directly at the source. Beyoncé looked directly at the source, and she turned what she found there into lemonade, and the world called it her masterpiece. And I am not asking you to make an album. I am not asking you to share your pain publicly or to perform your healing for an audience. What I am asking you is far simpler and far more difficult than that. I am asking you to stop pretending, to stop performing fine, to stop carrying the weight of unexamined pain through a life that deserves your full and honest presence. Because the version of you that has faced the truth is always more powerful than the version of you that is spending enormous energy trying to avoid it. And Beyoncé proved that with every single track on that album. And now the question sitting in the room with you is whether you are ready to make your own lemonade. There is a version of Beyoncé that the world sees, and that version is breathtaking and powerful and seemingly superhuman. A woman who appears on stage in complete command of every muscle and every note and every moment. A woman whose performances are so precisely constructed and so explosively delivered that audiences walk away feeling like they have witnessed something that exists outside the normal boundaries of human capability. And that version is real. It is not an illusion, but it is the result. And what the world almost never sees is the process that produces that result. The years and the hours and the physical and emotional cost of becoming the kind of performer who can stand on a stage in front of 100,000 people and make every single one of them feel like the show was made specifically for them. Beyoncé is famous in the professional world for a work ethic that borders on obsession. And the people who have worked with her, the dancers and the musicians and the directors and the choreographers, speak about her dedication with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Because she does not rehearse like a star. She rehearses like someone who is terrified of being mediocre. Like someone for whom good enough is a phrase that has no meaning. Like someone who understands, at a cellular level, that the distance between good and extraordinary is not talent, but repetition. Not inspiration, but discipline. Not the moments of genius, but the thousands of ordinary moments of unglamorous and exhausting work that nobody photographs, and nobody applauds, and nobody sees. She has spoken openly about the physical toll of her career, about the miscarriages she experienced while continuing to work at a pace that most healthy people could not maintain, about the pressure she placed on her own body in the pursuit of a standard that she herself had set impossibly high. And she has spoken about the years of struggling with her body image and her relationship with food and the way that the industry she worked in had specific and unforgiving ideas about what a woman's body should look like. And I want you to hear all of this, not as a list of struggles to feel sorry about, but as evidence, concrete and undeniable evidence, that the life you admire from the outside was built on the inside through pain and persistence, and a refusal to use difficulty as a reason to stop. There is a rehearsal video that exists of Beyoncé preparing for her 2018 Coachella performance, which was later released as a documentary called Homecoming. And in that documentary, you see something that no highlight reel and no award show and no magazine cover will ever show you. You see the months of preparation, the military precision of the rehearsals, the physical exhaustion written on the faces of every person in that room, including hers. You see her directing and correcting and demanding more from herself and from everyone around her. And you see a woman who had given birth to twins just 8 months before that performance and who stood on that stage and delivered what many people consider the greatest live performance in the history of music festivals. Not because she was gifted, but because she worked for it in a way that most people are simply not willing to work for anything. And this is the part where I need to be completely honest with you, because it would be very easy to hear all of this and feel inspired for a few minutes and then return to your life exactly as it was. And I understand that impulse. I understand how the distance between someone like Beyoncé and your own daily reality can feel so enormous that inspiration itself starts to feel pointless. But that distance is not the truth. The truth is that the only real difference between the life you have and the life you want is the standard you are willing to hold yourself to when nobody is watching, in the rehearsals of your own life that nobody films and nobody applauds, in the daily choices you make about how much of yourself you are truly willing to give to the thing you claim you want most. And Beyoncé made that choice every single day. And the stage was just where the world got to see the result. There is a trap that success builds around the people it visits, and it is one of the most seductive and dangerous traps in the world, because it does not look like a trap at all. It looks like comfort. It looks like a rival. It looks like the moment you have been working toward finally revealing itself. And the trap is this: once you have found something that works, once the world has accepted you and rewarded you and built an expectation around who you are and what you do, the easiest and most human thing in the world is to stay exactly there, to repeat the formula, to deliver what the audience already knows they want, to protect what you have built by never risking it. And most people, even extraordinarily talented and successful people, eventually choose that comfort over the uncertainty of reinvention. And in choosing it, they slowly stop growing, slowly stop surprising themselves, and slowly become a smaller version of everything they once were. Beyoncé has never chosen that comfort, and this is perhaps the most instructive and the most challenging aspect of her entire story, because she has reached the summit of popular music not once but multiple times, and each time she has looked at the view from the top and then turned around and started climbing something entirely different. And her 2022 album Renaissance was the most recent and perhaps the most deliberate example of this pattern, because Renaissance was not the album that anyone who had followed her career would have predicted. It was a deep and joyful and complex exploration of black dance music and club culture and the underground traditions that had shaped popular music for decades, without ever receiving the mainstream recognition they deserved. And it was Beyoncé using her enormous platform to shine a light on something larger than herself. Renaissance was an act of artistic generosity and personal courage at the same time, because it required her to step away from the image of untouchable perfection that she had spent decades constructing and to instead become a student again, to go back to the beginning of something, to learn and to absorb and to honor the people and the traditions that had come before her. And there is something profoundly important in that gesture for anyone who is trying to build a life of lasting meaning, because the willingness to be a student again, to admit that you do not know everything, to approach a new territory with humility and curiosity rather than with the armor of your existing reputation. That willingness is what keeps a person alive in the deepest sense of the word. Alive in the sense of growing and changing and becoming rather than simply existing and repeating. And I want you to think about your own life right now, today, in this moment, because how long have you been repeating yourself? How long have you been delivering the same version of who you are to the same people in the same situations, expecting that somehow the result will eventually change? How long have you been staying inside the boundaries of what has already worked, instead of asking yourself the much more frightening and much more important question of what might work if you were willing to start over? if you were willing to look foolish, if you were willing to be a beginner again in the area of your life that matters most to you, Beyoncé. Beyoncé, at the absolute peak of her power, chose to be a beginner again, and the world called it a masterpiece. The refusal to repeat yourself is not just an artistic principle, it is a life principle. And it is one of the hardest principles to practice because the world around you is constantly encouraging you to stay the same, constantly rewarding you for being predictable, constantly making it more comfortable to deliver what is expected than to risk delivering something new. And the people around you have built their relationship with you on the foundation of who you already are, and any change you make will disturb that foundation. And some of those people will resist your growth, not out of malice, but out of their own fear. And you must learn to love those people without letting their fear become your ceiling. Because your life is not a performance designed to make other people comfortable. Your life is the one unrepeatable story that only you can tell. And Beyoncé has told hers, with a boldness and a restlessness and a refusal to be finished, that should make you deeply uncomfortable with any version of yourself that has decided it is already complete. You have traveled through an entire life in the last 40 minutes. You have walked through the rejection and the rehearsals and the public defeats and the private losses and the moments of terrifying courage that nobody saw except the person living them. And now we are here, at the end of her story, and the beginning of a question that only you can answer. And the question is not about Beyoncé anymore. It stopped being about Beyoncé a long time ago, because her story was never really the point. The point was always you. Sitting wherever you are sitting right now, listening to these words in a language that you are working to master, carrying inside you a life that you have not yet fully committed to living. Think about what you have heard today. A girl who lost on national television at 11 years old and went home and kept working. A young woman who fired her own father because growth demanded it. An artist who exposed her deepest private pain to millions of people because she understood that honest art is braver than perfect art. A performer who gave birth to twins and 8 months later delivered the greatest stage performance of her generation, not because the conditions were ideal, but because she had prepared for that moment every single day for her entire life. And none of those things happened because she was special in the way that people use that word to create distance between themselves and the people they admire. They happened because she made a decision, and then she made it again, and then she made it again, every single morning, in the silence, before the world was watching. And now I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with this question long after this audio is ended, and the silence has returned, and you are alone with the only voice that truly matters, which is your own. And the question is this: what have you been postponing? Not because you lack the ability, not because the circumstances are impossible, not because the timing is wrong, but because somewhere along the way you made a quiet and uncelebrated decision to treat your own life as something that could wait, as something that would begin properly once the conditions improved, once the fear decreased, once the people around you gave you permission, once you felt ready. And I need you to hear this clearly and carry it with you. That moment is never coming. If you keep waiting for it, the conditions will not improve on their own. The fear does not leave before you move. It leaves because you move. Beyoncé was not fearless. She was not immune to doubt. She was not protected from pain or loss, or public failure or private devastation. She was a human being who felt all of those things with the same intensity that you feel them. And the only difference? The single and unglamorous and available to you right now difference is that she refused to let those feelings make her decisions. She felt the fear and she went to the rehearsal anyway. She felt the grief and she went to the studio anyway. She felt the doubt and she walked onto the stage anyway. And the world that you see when you look at her life is simply the accumulated result of all those anyways. All those small and difficult and private decisions to move forward when every comfortable instinct was telling her to stop. So here is where I leave you. Not with a conclusion, not with a tidy summary, not with a farewell, but with the weight of everything you have just heard pressing gently but firmly against. The part of you that already knows what you need to do. The part of you that has always known The part that gets quiet in moments like this, when the noise of distraction falls away and the truth becomes impossible to avoid. And the truth is that you have been given one life, one unrepeatable and non-negotiable and breathtakingly brief life. And somewhere inside that life, there is a version of you that you have not yet had the courage to become. And that version is not waiting for better circumstances. It is waiting for you to decide, right now, today, in this moment, that waiting is over, that the rehearsal is finished, that it is time to walk onto your own stage and begin.